Okay. Truly, I want to thank you all for coming. For those of you that are returning to attend another presentation by the Institute, I thank you for coming back. And as many have heard me say before, whatever is garnered via these presentations, I sincerely hope you'll pass the information on to your sons, to your daughters, to the friends within the community. Because right now, and I think you've heard me say this before also, history is not being emphasized within America's high school systems. What's being emphasized now is science, technology, engineering, and math, as it should be, as it should be. But what's being de-emphasized so that students can focus on those other four topics is American history, is culture, is political science. And as a consequence, who do I believe students now count upon to learn about American history? You. So I urge you, please pass the information on, whether it be from this presentation or others, because you're a very, very critical part of their educational development. You may not realize it, but you are. Now, as far as today is concerned, well, let's take a look at what the presentation will be about. It will be about Bataan, when men have to die. We'll explain that in just a few moments. In reality, what it is a presentation on the fall of the Philippines in 1942. 75 years ago, this time within American history. This time within American history. And what's key to all this is coming to understand not just what happened, where it happened, but why it happened. And believe you me, very, very important now than ever before, because in times past, during this period of time, the threat to the Asia-Pacific area was an expansionist Japan who was seeking to expand its control over the region and establish a new world order. That new world order, the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. And if they had, in collusion with two other countries that were seeking to establish new world orders. What were the other two countries? Nazi Germany, establishing in essence the new world order known as the Greater Third Reich. And throughout the Mediterranean area, fascist Italy. If those three countries succeeded in establishing the new world orders, I can tell you life would not be the way we're living it today. I can definitely tell you, our life would not be the way we're living it today. And as far as now talking about the Greater Far East, yes, we're going to refer to the period of time of 1942. But today, is there a similar threat within the region? Is there a country that's agonizing and antagonizing its neighbors? And what country is that? China as well as North Korea, but North Korea in particular. So the reason I point this out to you is I'd like to end with the statement, is history repeating itself? Is history repeating itself? Okay, after I haven't said that, let's now head back to this period of time that unfolded 75 years ago as we are sitting here today. The Philippine Islands. Let's take a look at their pre-World War II status. The Philippines were an American colonial possession consisting of 7,100 islands with a population of over 17 million people. As far as the capital of the Philippines, it's Manila. And it's noted on the screen, it's on the largest island within the Philippine Islands, known as Luzon. That's the capital of all the Philippines. And as far as what the situation was within the Philippines in the fall of 1941, I'll call it a SITREP, Situation Report. Let's take a look at this. There's a location of the Philippines within the Asia-Pacific area. The islands sit aside a key sea lane flowing from Southeast Asia to the Japanese home islands along the coast of China. If indeed Japan lost access to that sea lane in any way, shape, or form, or they were inhibited from utilizing that sea lane in any way, shape, or form, their imperial economy would be severely, severely hurt. It's the reason why they feared any country other than Japan being in control of the Philippines. Now, knowing that Japan was out via their foreign policy to establish the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere throughout the area, we, as the colonial possessors, what we did was start to prepare the Philippines against a feared Japanese seizure. And what was located in the Philippines that we were preparing? A Filipino army consisting of 10 relatively untrained reserve divisions, 110,000 men, plus supplemented with an American military contingent consisting of some 30,000 people. That includes men within the U.S. Army at the time, within the U.S. Navy at the time, and within the U.S. Army Air Force at the time, all based, all stationed in the Philippines. And to deter feared Japanese aggression, look what we do as a nation. We stationed there the United States Army Air Corps at Clark Field on Luzon Island with the largest Air Force that we had available within our military. We were hoping that by that Air Force being located in the Philippine Islands, we would definitely deter Japan from ever considering invading the Philippines. We did have naval power there, but primarily based in Manila Harbor. It consisted of a small number of cruisers, destroyers, and motor torpedo boats, plus a few submarines. Where did we base our major naval power in order to deter Japan from ever considering attacking the United States? Well, where did we base it? In Pearl Harbor. Right. Not Manila Harbor. And despite our commitment, take a look at, in essence, the size of our commitment to the Philippines at this particular time. Our commitment to the training and equipping of the Philippine military, in essence, it was an effort that was continually underfunded by the American Congress because of the primary reason that you, the American public, at this particular time, did not want to see America engaged in any war in Europe or in Asia. So as a consequence, the public itself did not permit our Congress to appropriately fund the defensive efforts in the Philippines. As far as the military command structure, well, some of these names I believe you're going to be familiar with. On top of it all was the commander of the U.S. Far East Forces, Lieutenant General Douglas MacArthur. Underneath him, he had a commander that commanded the military forces located in northern Luzon. And they were known as the Northern Luzon Force, or the NLF. The general in charge of that, Major General Wainwright. The general in charge of the Southern Luzon Force was Major General George Parker. And then, as far as the commander of the U.S. Far East Army Air Forces, Brigadier General Lewis Brereton. And the commander of the U.S. Asiatic Fleet, Admiral Thomas Hart. Now, in command of all the Philippine Army, consisting of primarily Filipinos, was another American general. And these forces were primarily located on all the other islands other than Luzon. That commander, U.S. Brigadier General William F. Sharp. All capable, intelligent, officers and well experienced in military matters. In many cases, several of these men served during the course of World War I. And by the way, tomorrow is the 100th anniversary of America's entrance into that major conflict. 100th anniversary. We declared war on Imperial Germany on April 6th, 1917. All right. Now, let me refer to this map. You may want to look at the map you also have within the packet. But we'd like to show you where the forces that I just referenced were specifically located. Northern Luzon, under General Wainwright, that's the location of his forces. Southern Luzon, under the command of General Parker, that's the general location of his forces. As far as the Air Force located in the Philippines, they were primarily based at three airports: Iba Field, Clark Field, and Nichols Field. Clark Field to the north of Manila, Nichols Field to the south of Manila. And located in Manila Harbor was the U.S. Pacific Fleet, assigned to protect this particular area. And that's under Admiral Hart. As you note there, Manila Harbor, sizable harbor, very sizable harbor within the Southeast Asia Pacific region. And to the east of the harbor, yes, is Manila itself. To the west of the harbor is a major peninsula known as the Bataan Peninsula. And we're going to reference Bataan Peninsula over and over again as we move through this presentation. But I in particular wanted you to see just where that is located. Its terrain features enable anyone that's in control of that peninsula to control the movement into the harbor and coming out of the harbor. Now, a few words about General Douglas MacArthur. He was the commander, or the actual commander, he was the Chief of Staff of the United States military, United States Army in particular, after World War I. He's truly a highly decorated military officer who served on the battlefield in France during the course of the Great War. Thereafter, rose in rank and was given the responsibility of becoming the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army. And he remained in Washington, D.C. for the greater part of his career. He wanted to remain beyond his retirement date. But there was a difference of opinion between him and the ruling president at that particular time, and that was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. FDR did not permit MacArthur to continue in his military position after his formal retirement date. So as a consequence, he did retire MacArthur. And what he did was send him to the Philippines. And per the request of the Filipino president, he becomes made a field marshal. And he's tasked with forming a Philippine army to defend the islands against any attack. Here's a picture of General MacArthur, at the time, retired from the U.S. military. So in essence, he's wearing the uniform of a field marshal with the Filipino Army. And he's talking to the president of the Philippines at this time, and that's President Quezon. However, while in charge of this military force with the responsibility that was noted just a few moments ago, he continually ignores the capabilities of the most immediate threat in the region, the Japanese military, believing it will never attack the Philippines. Never attack the Philippines. True belief. And one thing about MacArthur's character, it was exhibited all throughout his military career, he always underestimated the enemy. Always underestimated the enemy. And in this case here, you're going to see where this underestimation, continued underestimation, plays itself out during the course of the campaign by the Japanese to take the Philippines. Now, he also exhibits this underestimation of the enemy in another war, after World War II. I don't know if indeed somebody maybe want to guess at who else he...
Chinese.
The Chinese. When they attacked the UN forces in November of 1950. One thing that MacArthur told the reigning president at that particular time, Douglas MacArthur, or Harry S. Truman, the Chinese will never attack. And if they do, we'll take care of them. Well, just the reverse took place. But the reason I mention that is because it's an indication, one more indication of his trait to always underestimate the enemy. Let me move on. What does he spend most of the funds that are given to him by the United States Congress? He spends money on parades and on public ceremonies instead of training the men and the units. And in July of 1941, keep in mind he's retired, he's recalled back to active duty by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And the reason why he's called back to active duty is because of the rising fear of Japan coming into a major conflict with the United States of America. So they reactivate MacArthur and they make him a 3-star general. They make him a 3-star general. Once he's reactivated, he is handed a war plan that he's told to execute. That war plan is known as War Plan Orange. But however, what does MacArthur do? He ignores the war plan. He ignores the war plan. Now, what's this war plan all about? Let me show you. War Plan Orange, it's part of an overall strategy developed by the U.S. military chiefs of staff. That overall strategy, it's known as Rainbow 5. The Rainbow 5 war plan had been determined in the fall of 1941. And by the way, the plan was also shared with the French and with the British. But it's our war plan, and it would be instituted if indeed America ever got involved in a war against Germany, Italy, and Japan. What's the war plan consist of? Well, a number of key elements. First element, because as our planners looked at the overall situation, if we ever got involved in a war with the Axis forces, the greater threat amongst those three Allied countries is Germany. So as a consequence, they came up with what's known as the Germany First strategy. And because all attention and most of America's military resources will be devoted to engaging and defeating Germany in any future war, take a look at how the Philippines were looked at. Philippine Islands, they were to be defended with the existing forces, supported by, as noted before, the latest planes that the U.S. Army Air Force could provide. Number two, the Philippines would not be reinforced. And the forces on the island, they immediately were ordered to withdraw onto Bataan Peninsula, the peninsula I had referenced before, and hold, preventing the use of Manila Harbor by the Japanese. The reason why that's so important, because as mentioned before, Manila Harbor is the largest harbor within the Asia-Pacific region and could accommodate a very, very large naval force like the Japanese Navy that they could utilize to further their aggressive moves throughout the Pacific region. So what were the forces charged to do? Yes, hold and prevent the use of Manila Harbor by hanging on to the Bataan Peninsula. And then thereafter, while on that peninsula, I'll wait the return of the U.S. military. Now, as far as MacArthur was concerned,
Was this Plan Orange, was this publicly known, or was this just through diplomatic channels?
basically known through military channels, although shared with, yes, our president and his cabinet. But it wasn't, in essence, one that was publicized to the American public. As far as MacArthur's judgment at this particular time, he ignores War Plan Orange. He ignores it. And what he does is he determines he can defend the island of Luzon by positioning major forces north, and that's the northern Luzon force, and south, the southern Luzon force, north and south of the capital, instead of concentrating them all on Bataan. Judgment 1. Judgment 2. What he does is he distributes food supplies and medical supplies and ammunition depots all throughout the islands. Not just Luzon, but all the other islands. So that these forces that he's dispersing to the islands and on Luzon would be well supplied via these depots. And he does so instead of concentrating all of these items on the Bataan Peninsula. And he believes, truly believes, that possessing the largest concentration of U.S. air power in the Pacific region would ward off any Japanese military assault, despite the reports that were coming him from around the Asia-Pacific region about Japan preparing for further aggressive moves, with, as part and parcel of those moves, invading the Philippines. Did he know? Did he hear? Did he somewhat witness in one way or another that this might be coming about? Yes, he did. Yes, he did. But it was his true belief, regardless of belief, that the Japanese would not attack Pearl Harbor. If war breaks out, he's going to count upon reinforcements immediately coming from the U.S. to assist in defending the islands. In perspective, he's determined to run his own war. That is MacArthur. He's determined to run his own war. So, as all this is unfolding, look what happens on November 27th, 1941. He gets a war warning directly from Washington, D.C. And what's the war warning all about? Well, let me have you take a look at that. Can I have somebody read that war warning? Jack, want to read it?
Navy War Warning, November 27, 1941. This dispatch is to be considered a war warning. Negotiations with Japan looking toward stabilization of conditions in the Pacific have ceased, and an aggressive move by Japan is expected in the next few days. The number and equipment of Japanese troops and the organization of naval task forces indicates an amphibious expedition against either the Philippines,
Thai or Thailand,
or KRA Peninsula,
which is the Malaysian Peninsula,
or possibly Borneo. Execute an appropriate defensive deployment preparatory to carrying out the tasks assigned in WPL 46.
Right. WPL stands for War Plan 46. All right. Here's the war warning issued by Admiral Howell Stark, Chief of Staff, U.S. Navy, as well as General George C. Marshall, Chief of Staff, U.S. Army. And again, within that warning, take a look at what is emphasized in terms of a threat to the U.S. The Philippines. The Philippines. And by the way, one thing that you don't see in here is any of our understanding that the Japanese might attack another naval base and air base and army base within the Pacific. And what bases am I talking about? Pearl Harbor. Right, Pearl Harbor. All right, so with this war warning having been issued, what's the status of forces in the Far East on December 8th, 1941? By the way, in Manila, it's December 8th, 1941. But when you go further east, you come across the international date line. What's the date? That's right, December 7th. So let's keep that in mind. All right, ground forces on full alert status throughout all the islands due to the war warning. Army Air Force units, they're grounded wingtip to wingtip on all the air bases with air crews at the ready for immediate takeoff. Here's a picture of what it looked like at that particular time, December 8th, 1941. It had been heard since December 7th, 1941 in Hawaii, unfolds before December 8th, 1941 in the Philippines. It had been heard that the Japanese did attack Pearl Harbor. And Brereton, the commander of the U.S. Army Air Forces in the Philippines, asked if he could launch his planes, send them out beyond the Philippines, and possibly search for any Japanese fleet that may be approaching the Philippines with the thought of this might be an invasion force. However, once again, with MacArthur's belief the Japanese are not going to attack Pearl Harbor, he refuses to permit planes to be launched. In fact, this request, it goes unanswered by MacArthur, who has his headquarters in Manila. Now, by the way, where does this all come from? It comes from Army annuals, or manuals and annuals that are printed that reflect the military history at this particular time. And also from authors that have written about this period of time. So it's just not me that's making this statement. I'm reflecting, in essence, the judgment and the opinion of military historians. As far as the naval forces, they're located at dockside with their crews at their battle stations. And there's another shot. And once again, keep in mind, December 8th is December 7th at Pearl Harbor. So, what is the result? Well, as people at home are sitting on a Sunday morning reading their daily newspapers. Well, same with people in Manila, in the Philippines, and throughout the Philippines, sitting on a Sunday morning reading the newspapers or going to church, or in essence looking forward to having an entertaining day with the family. And as they are doing just that, what happens? Let's face it, what happens? Complete surprise. All forces in the Philippines are caught as such. Complete surprise, just like it was in Pearl Harbor. Japanese air attack on December 8th, let me talk about it. Japanese come in at noon on December 8th, at noon. And when they strike all the air bases from their air base in Formosa. And as they come into the region, what is the status of the U.S. air crews and pilots at this particular time? Well, since it's 12 noon, they're all permitted to stand down and go to lunch. They're all permitted to stand down and go to lunch. With this being the case, this attack, which was originally scheduled for earlier in the morning, well, it does come off just at a time when all the planes are lined up wingtip to wingtip and unmanned. The interesting thing about this air attack, it was supposed to be launched at the same time that the attack on Pearl Harbor was being launched. And it was supposed to strike at the same time as the planes were striking Pearl Harbor. But because of a heavy fog over Formosa, it delays the strike force from taking on off. Japanese consider it a very negative thing to happen because, in essence, then therefore the attack was going to occur after. They thought the Americans would be thoroughly alerted and ready for ready for some type of attack on the Philippines. But it was not the case. It was not the case, since the Japanese did not attack. Right after Pearl Harbor, in terms of time, what the air crews were permitted to do was to stand down and go to lunch. The air attack destroys 90% of the U.S. Far East Army Air Force on the ground, enabling the Japanese to gain immediate air superiority. Immediate air superiority. Take a look at this picture of that Clark Airfield on December 8th, 1941. This is just a picture of Clark Airfield. Similar pictures could have been taken on all the other airfields. Our Army Air Force was destroyed. Was destroyed. And after the air attack, an expected Japanese amphibious assault on the islands does not happen. Everyone's therefore, after the attack, on the alert, waiting for the Japanese to attack. But when they don't, look at what the alerted ground forces are enabled to do. And that is stand down and gain a sigh of relief. And they gain that sigh of relief until December 10th. Until December 10th. What happens on December 10th? Well, let's take a look at this. The Japanese do initiate a major amphibious assault. Major amphibious assault. And I'd like to give you, without becoming too specific, an idea of what the Japanese launched against the Philippines. They utilized two reinforced veteran divisions of the 14th Army to assault and seize, in particular, Luzon. After all, that's the largest island in the Philippines, that's where the capital is located, and that's where three major air bases are located. Pointed them out before. Japanese wanted it all. Japanese wanted it all. Forces to capture Luzon within 50 days, so that the units can then be used elsewhere, where the Japanese believed they needed to shift those forces once Luzon had been taken and the Filipinos subdued. They're going to be utilized to march further, along with other troops, into Malaysia and then into Dutch East Indies. This 50-day time frame was critical to the Japanese military. The Philippines had to be taken, as far as they're concerned, within 50 days. As far as they're concerned, the Philippines could be taken within 50 days. So with the map in hand, and once again I'll refer to that map that I handed out in the packet, you'll see 14th Army was to conduct amphibious assaults at Apari and Vigan. Now I'm being specific, but I'd like to show you just where these assaults took place. Apari and Vigan are located in the northern part of Luzon. And these assaults are initiated on December 10th. Goal, seize local airfields, and pin the northern Luzon fighting force in that region. All right, furthermore, 14th Army to conduct another amphibious operation at what's known as Legazpi. Now, where's Legazpi? We'll see it on the map in the far south of the island of Luzon. And the idea behind this amphibious operation was to seize part of southern Luzon and take the local airfields in that area. And they don't stop. What now occurs is conduct a major amphibious operation at the Lingayen Gulf. At the Lingayen Gulf. On December 22nd, this is 12 days after the invasion of northern Luzon. And reason being, to further pin down the northern Luzon force and advance south to capture Manila. The hope was that the initial operation would pin the northern Luzon force in the north of the island. So when this force landed, it would land behind that force and then move south and easily take Manila. And then conduct a major amphibious assault just east of Manila, what's known as Lamond Bay. And you'll see That took place on December 24th. Advanced north and aid in the capture of Manila. All right, now I know I'm being specific, but let me just take it a step further from this one. Take a look at how this unfolds. Here's the map. Again, you do have this in your packet. December 10th, major invasion force, North Luzon, at Vigan and at Parry. And then thereafter, to draw attention away from what's happening in the northern part of Luzon, they land in the southern part of Luzon, Legazpi Bay, on December 12th. And then in turn, they conduct a third operation into the Ligayan Gulf itself. And the whole idea behind that was to land behind the force that was being pinned down in the northern part of Luzon. Cut across the northern part of the peninsula, northern part of the island, and then attack south and seize Manila. And while this is all occurring, then attack on December 24th through Limon Bay. Now, as complicated as this was, this is what the Japanese planned to do, and by the way, it works. It works. Key to it all, operations that MacArthur did not believe the Japanese military could ever carry out in the assault on the Philippine Army, the Philippine Islands. He was not in any way, shape, or form prepared to counter this onslaught. Architect of the plan, well, let's put him up on the line. Lieutenant General Masahiro Homa. He's the commander of the Japanese 14th Army, a veteran of the Chinese conflict that was initiated in China in 1931. This individual is well experienced field commander. Now, if you would like to show you, I hope you'll bear with me, I'd like to show you a film that the Japanese prepared covering the invasion, in which they showed to all the Japanese within their home islands to spur their interest in the military activity of the Japanese military throughout Southeast Asia and garner their support. Let's take a look at this. Okay, shown all throughout Japan for the specific reason to spur the continued support of the Japanese population of their military. Whoops, hit the wrong thing. Okay, so what is the impact of the Japanese attack? Let's take a look at it. MacArthur, faced with Japanese forces advancing on Manila from the north and from the south, and lacking any air support. Keep in mind what happened to his Air Force. It was knocked out the first day of the Japanese attack. First day, 90% of that force. What does he do? He now executes War Plan Orange. Now executes War Plan Orange, a plan that he totally ignored. Plan that he totally ignored. And what he immediately does is he withdraws the southern Luzon force onto the Bataan Peninsula, while the northern Luzon force fights a desperate delaying action against the Japanese in the northern part of Luzon. So while the northern Luzon force is holding the Japanese to the north, the southern Luzon force slips into the Bataan Peninsula. Picture of the Bataan Peninsula. And after the successful withdrawal of the southern Luzon force, he then withdraws the northern Luzon force. He also declares Manila an open city to influence the Japanese not to bomb the capital. And thereafter relocates his headquarters on Corregidor Island, which is 2 miles south of the Bataan Peninsula. And it's from the Corregidor Island that he establishes a command base to defend Bataan. And the arrow points out where Corregidor Island is located. And what he then does is initiate the objective of denying the Japanese of Manila Harbor by fighting a delaying action on Bataan. The original goal of War Plan Orange. The original goal. However, with all this now having taken place, let's take a look at what's missing from Bataan. What's missing? Food supplies. What's missing? Ammunition supplies. Medical supplies. All critical needs to adequately supply a force of some 68,000 Filipino troops and some 12,000 American troops. Now concentrated on Bataan as of 1 January 1942. So, in essence, what now? What now? Well, let's take a look. MacArthur immediately sends out a plea to Washington, D.C. His plea? He desperately pleads for ammunition, medical supplies, and food, all which he ignored stockpiling on Bataan ever since he received the order to execute War Plan Orange. And he pleads for relief from the U.S. forces to come to his aid. What's the War Department response? Well, the War Department at this particular time is headed up by Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson. What's his reply? Well, to bolster Saga morale on Bataan, which he knew was coming about, he sends a message that aid is in the process of being organized. But in reality, reinforcements, however, never sent to Bataan because of the first objective of the Rainbow War Plan. And what was that first objective? Well, as noted, Germany first. Germany first. What's President FDR's order? Well, after hearing continued pleas from MacArthur, and those pleas coming forth with a sense of criticism of the President of the United States, what does MacArthur do? or what does FDR do? He orders MacArthur off the islands. And what he does is order him and his immediate staff to go to Australia and assume command of the American military forces being concentrated there, with the aim and goal of utilizing those forces sometime in the future to counterattack the Japanese on the Philippines. He successfully evades the Japanese blockade, naval blockade in and around the Philippines, and does make it down to Australia. And once he comes there, he renders a very, very famous statement. Anyone want to guess what that famous statement was? I shall return. Now, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Who's he in command of? What's he in command of? He's in command of the American military in Australia. You would think he would have said, we will return. That's not MacArthur. That's not MacArthur. I shall return. It's a statement that will forever, ever be recorded in history. All right. With all this being the case, let's take a look at now what Secretary of War Henry Stimson says to the President of the United States, knowing now that no aid really can be sent to the Philippines. What does Secretary of War Stimson state to President Roosevelt at a conference in early January? Simply this: there are times when men have to die. He knew as he was relaying this to FDR, the defending forces are Bataan, are doomed. Knew it. All right. With all this being the case, take a look at now who happened to be in charge of those defending forces. Now, all located on the Bataan Peninsula. You have the commander of U.S. forces on Luzon, and that's General Jonathan Wainwright. His headquarters is Corregidor Island, and he takes over the headquarters that MacArthur had. He's the individual that is appointed by FDR to take over for MacArthur. The commander of all the forces fighting on the Bataan Peninsula is Major General Edward King. His headquarters at Mariveles, and at the tip of the Bataan Peninsula, right, located on Manila Bay. Now, commanders knew, as well as their men knew, the following. They're in charge of, we are the battling bastards of Bataan. No mama, no papa, no Uncle Sam. They knew it. They knew it. And in essence, under the command of those commanders, they continued to try to execute as best they could War Plan Orange. This is a time when the Japanese felt within a matter of days, it's going to be over. It's going to be over. As far as Japanese high command judgments, at this particular time, with all this taking place, MacArthur, by the way, was pulled out of command in March of 1942. So what are their subsequent judgments and actions? Well, there's a picture of General Homer arriving on Luzon. Japanese high command now confident of success and believing that their forces are ahead of schedule in taking Manila. What was that number of days I asked you to remember? 50, right. And all this that had taken place all occurred within a very short space of time of latter part of December, January, and February. Were they on schedule as well as ahead of schedule? They were. So what do? Believing they're just days away from taking Manila. What they do is they order, after taking out of operation a number of veteran units and sending them elsewhere, they order Homer on January 9th to attack the remaining U.S. forces concentrated on Bataan. And the attack does succeed in forcing the U.S. forces back to a secondary line on that peninsula, where the attack is unexpectedly halted by a very determined resistance. Now, with more than 2,700 dead, 4,000 wounded, 13,000 sick, he halts the operation. He halts the operation. Because he does, now take a look at what comes about. The Japanese Supreme Command becomes very concerned about the battle for Bataan, because it looks like now it's going to take longer than 50 days to achieve their objective. And they're more concerned about world impression, about the success of the Japanese military. They were looking at the fact that the world started to gain the impression that their forces could be defeated. Their forces could be defeated. So in view of all this, what does the High Command do? They're dissatisfied with Homer. They shake up his command and they order him to resume the offensive, which he does on April 3rd. Now, the situation on Bataan in April of 1942 is as follows. You've got, these are pictures from the actual conflict on Bataan. First week of April, the besieged U.S. forces on Bataan, all on half rations. All on half rations. And after battling the Japanese forces on that peninsula for 99 days, 99 days of engagement. What did the Japanese count upon? Only 50. Only 50. The American Filipino forces, however, at this time are nearly out of food, out of liquids, out of ammunition. 90% of the men are ill from dysentery, malaria, or beriberi. Plus many are suffering from being wounded. And what comes about? Well, due to the unavailability of medical supplies, it results in many, many deaths of the seriously ill and seriously wounded. Morale amongst all the Filipinos within the defending force, the Americans within the defending force, very low. All now realizing that expected aid and reinforcements from the U.S. not on the way. Not on the way. So what comes about? Well, maybe people do not really know that what does unfold is the largest surrender of an American force ever. The largest surrender of an American force, and it occurs on April 9th, 1942. Major, major defeat within American military history. So let's take a look at what brings this about. Despite the repeated orders from General Wainwright to General King to fight on, what the Japanese do is, upon a resumption of an offensive, they come within a mile of the major field hospital of the defending forces on Bataan. And what King decides to do with his forces battered, staggered, starving, and with the major hospital now under considerable threat of attack, what he decides to do is surrender those forces on April 9th. It's the largest surrender of American forces ever, and General King knows his action is in violation of direct orders. Knows it's in violation of direct orders. What he does is he anticipates being court-martialed. However, the world knows what the status of the defending forces on Bataan happened to be. So in essence, with everyone understanding the extreme circumstances he and his forces were facing, charges are never filed against General King. He's imprisoned along with the rest of his men. What's the result? The Bataan Death March. The Bataan Death March. Picture of the Death March itself as it starts to unfold. And keep in mind, when does this all occur? 75 years ago today. 75 years ago today. As far as the Bataan Death March is concerned, here's a quick description. The forces on the Bataan Peninsula are surrendered on April 9th, as you're now aware. How many are surrendered? 67,500 Filipinos, 10,500 U.S. soldiers. The captives are all made to march 65 miles to a prisoner of war camp known as Camp O'Donnell, which is at the head of the Bataan Peninsula. Whether they march, what conditions they march under? One, dirty, dusty roads, all the men underfed, lacking water, and marching up those roads during the course of a day in 110-degree temperature. That was the standard temperature in the Philippines at this particular time, 110 degrees. And one thing about the Japanese military, the one thing they did not have in Luzon at this particular time was a major motorized force that they could utilize to have picked up these captives and transported them up to Camp O'Donnell. They didn't have the trucks, they didn't have the jeeps, they didn't have the armored vehicles to do so. That was a consequence. One of the major reasons why. They all had to march, regardless of their condition. They all had to march. Captives, brutally treated on the march, with many being beaten, clubbed, and bayoneted. Corregidor soon thereafter, and I'll explain this in a few moments, surrenders on May 6, 1942. The Bataan Death March goes from April 9th to 21st, 1942, 12 days of brutality. 12 days of brutality. Here's a map of the actual death march. You'll see the solid red arrow originates in Mariveles, the tip of the Bataan Peninsula in the south, moving up to San Fernando, and that is part of the 65-mile march. 65-mile march. At San Fernando, they were all shoved into boxcars, as could be done. Many men died on those boxcars due to suffocation, due to crowding of those cars. And on those trains, they were all transported up to Capas, where then in turn they had to walk an additional amount of distance over to Camp O'Donnell. Pure hell. And how do we know about it? Well, we'd like to point this out to you. It's because of one of several memoirs written by the Bataan Death March survivors. And what I'll show you here is what I'll put up on the screen. And that is a book that contains a memoir of one of those survivors. His name, Harry J. Wittenhill. And what he does is describe for all to read what he experienced during the course of the death march, which he survives. And then his imprisonment in the Philippines for the next 2 years as a Japanese prisoner of war. He thereafter, in the third year of his captivity, is transported up via merchant vessel to Japan and spends the last year of the war in a Japanese labor camp, supporting their war effort as a prisoner of war. He notes this all within this memoir. And I, along with Dr. John McLaughlin, had the very honor to have met the family and who gave us the memoir and permitted us to print it in this book known as When Men Have to Die. And we did this in concert with another colleague, Marie Summers. Marie, I was hoping could be here tonight, but she's on her way to Sydney, Australia to be with her daughter, to spend the summer down there. But in collusion all three were able to put together this publication. And as noted in the memoir, would like to point this out to you. Number of captives on the march, 67,500 Filipinos, 10,500 Americans. Number who died on the hot, dusty road to San Fernando. Take a look at these numbers. Keep in mind, this is all within 12 days. 6,000 Filipinos, 650 Americans. Number subject to brutality, being beaten, bayoneted, or killed while on the march. Well, as noted in here, were men beaten? You better believe. Very, very brutally. Very, very brutally. Were they bayoneted? Yes, they were. With bayonets of this type. This comes from a veteran of the Asia Pacific War. He brought back a Japanese bayonet. Were many of the men bayoneted on this march? Yes, they were. Were many of the men killed via the use of these bayonets? You better believe. You better believe. And why the brutality? Because those within the Japanese military considered anyone that surrendered as being dishonorable and deserving of death. Deserving of death. It's the reason why so many men were killed on this march. Well, it's all said and done. Who was subject to this all? Everyone. Everyone on the march. As far as the overall surrender of the Philippines, well, let's take a look at this now. Being headquartered on Corregidor, the island fortress in the middle of Manila Bay, 2 miles south of Bataan, General Wainwright and his troops face now continuous bombardment from Japanese artillery based on Bataan. Based on Bataan. And also aerial attack without any hope of relief. There's a picture of the island as it exists today, as it existed then. It's 4 miles long and at its widest point, 2.5 miles. Although the island is heavily laced with an intricate tunnel system to protect the troops. So intense is the Japanese bombardment, look what happens to the island itself. In essence, the terrain on the island actually becomes altered. Homeless forces ultimately land on the island on May 5th, and after the 11,000 defenders suffer extremely heavy casualties, General Wainwright now decides to surrender. And General Homa accepts the surrender at a formal ceremony on May 7th. I'd like you to see this now. Okay. Let me see if I can get it to advance here. There we go. With General Wainwright, let's take a look at this. He surrenders not because he's defeated on the battlefield. He surrenders because of what his troops were experiencing. Similarly, a similar action taken by General King when he surrendered Bataan. He surrenders because of a lack of supplies and mass sickness in the ranks. And when he surrenders, he thought he only would surrender the forces on Luzon. When MacArthur left, it was MacArthur's orders to Wainwright that he was only in command of the fighting forces on Luzon. However, the Japanese did not recognize that stipulation. And what they told Wainwright is he had to surrender all forces throughout the Philippines, not just on Luzon, but on Mindanao and other islands. And if he didn't, then those men that did surrender to the Japanese would be put to death. That was the stipulation made to Wainwright. Wainwright indeed steps back and makes the statement that all forces now will surrender. All forces. The interesting thing about Wainwright, despite holding off the Japanese for some 99 days and conducting an amazing delaying action, which does have an impact on military history. I'll explain that to you in just a minute. He was recommended for a Medal of Honor. However, when the Medal of Honor recommendation comes up to his commanding officer for approval, that commanding officer turns it down. Who's the commanding officer that turns down this recommendation? General Douglas MacArthur is right. However, what was MacArthur given once he reached Australia? Does anybody know what happened with him? Gets the 4th star, and he's awarded a Medal of Honor. He's awarded a Medal of Honor. The interesting thing about being awarded that Medal of Honor, he's one of the only persons within the American military awarded such a medal for suffering a defeat. Not a victory, but a defeat. Ultimately, after Wainwright is released from a Japanese prison after World War II, who does authorize him receiving the Medal of Honor? The president at the time, Harry S. Truman. But at this particular time, he's denied the Medal of Honor by General Douglas MacArthur. All right, now let's take a look at Bataan now, and we'll close this out. Last-ditch defense of Bataan, it's initially seen as futile and a very costly effort. You're aware of all the figures. And the sacrifices of the fallen and captured units have been made entirely in vain. Entirely in vain. And despite the desperate 99-day battle, it's seen as having no influence on Japanese strategy and the war in the Pacific. The result? The largest surrender of an American military force in any war that results in the brutal Bataan Death March. Remaining supreme over the Philippines are these flags. These flags are taken from World War II veterans. This flag here, made out of silk, as you would suspect, is a flag carried by many a unit on the battlefield. But the one carried in honor is a flag of this nature, larger in size, you saw it on the film, which is the flag of Imperial Japan. And units of honor were allowed to carry that into battle. And by the way, today, this flag is banned from Japan. Just like the Nazi swastika is banned from Germany, this flag here is banned from Japan. This is the flag that continues to fly over Japan. So now let's take a look at the Bataan Death March.
1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. The U.S. fleet was crippled. 10 hours later, across the Pacific, they attacked the Philippines, clearing the way for an overwhelming invasion of the islands. U.S. forces, including 10,000 Americans and 60,000 Filipinos, go back to the Bataan Peninsula. Without a navy to rescue them, and with their backs to the sea, they're trapped. Despite promises to the contrary, President Roosevelt and his military high command decided to focus first on Europe and on stopping Hitler. This strategy effectively seals the fate of the Philippines and the men trapped on Bataan. Under orders and against his wishes, General MacArthur escapes to Australia, vowing to return. After 4 months of fighting without supplies, starving American and Filipino troops surrendered to the Japanese Imperial Army. It is the largest single defeat in the history of the American military. Unequipped to house or feed 70,000 prisoners of war, the Japanese take the weakened soldiers on a brutal 60-mile forced march. Men fall out of line, are bayoneted, or shot. 15,000 perish on what would become known as the Bataan Death March. The surviving POWs are herded into various camps at O'Donnell, Bantuan, and Palawan. The Japanese guards view surrender as a disgrace, treat them viciously. Thousands died from disease, starvation, and abuse.
Okay. I referenced the Whitting Hill memoir. I would like to read a short passage from the memoir itself. Finally, I think of April 9, 1942, when General King surrendered, an exhausted, beaten, hungry, disease-ridden army, and the event known as the Bataan Death March was followed. 68 miles from Mariveles to the San Fernando railhead, then in boxcars to the village of Capas, and then an 8-kilometer hike to the first prison camp, Camp O'Donnell. 10,000 men died on that hot, dusty road, 1,500 of which were Americans. They were shot, bayoneted, beheaded, or beaten to death for no reason whatsoever. And I think of that limerick composed by an anonymous member of the 31st Infantry on Bataan. And that limerick, we are the battling bastards of Bataan. No mama, no papa, no Uncle Sam, no aunts, no uncles, no nephews or nieces, no guns, no ammunition, no artillery pieces, and nobody gives a damn. Written by an individual that also survived the Bataan Death March. That was their feeling at this particular time. But I would like to relate to you that their sacrifice was not made in vain. So the defeat of Bataan is seen today, let's close out this way. The Battle of Bataan is now seen by historians as being an important moral and psychological victory because of the following. Dissatisfied with the command of the Philippine invasion force, General Homa was recalled by the Japanese High Command in August of 1942 and remained in disgrace without a command for the rest of the war in Japan. 1. 2. The critical use of Manila Harbor for operational purposes denied the Japanese Navy until the end of May 1942. The battling bastards of Bataan gave an enormous lift to American morale at home and the will to win. Just when it was needed. Keep in mind this all occurred right after Pearl Harbor. As defenders stubborn resistance, it became significant propaganda victory for the U.S., for it proved that the Japanese army was not invincible. Not invincible. So, yes, the effort now is given a thumbs up by American military historians. And in closing, it's important to further understand news of this death march, in essence, terrible news of so many deaths and the maltreatment of U.S. prisoners, it was withheld from the public by our president, FDR, and his military chiefs, because they feared if indeed the word was given out about this death march, the Japanese would bring about further retaliation against POWs. So therefore, the news is not released until January 27th, 1944, nearly 2 years after the surrender, after the death march. And there's a reason behind doing all this. And that reason, the release is timed, in fact, to launch a major war bond drive to reinforce the fighting spirit of a war-weary United States. Keep in mind when this is released, January 1944, we have been at war now for over a good 3 years. Nation's news media, once they capture the information, they spin the event into a wartime propaganda. Just when needed. Just when needed. Because on January 30th, 1944, the American military launched a critical Central Pacific drive that ultimately results in the surrender of Japan in September of 1945. In essence, the most famous cartoon that comes to the fore, which truly does spur American morale, spur American effort. Take a look at this. And Ken, can I have you read it? Not so much what's in the center, but the headlines. That's okay.
What are you going to do about it? Stay on the job until every murdering Jap is wiped out.
Right. Key phrase, stay on the job. Continue to support the American military, and we do. And we do. So therefore, as now seen, the sacrifice of the veterans and the fallen of Bataan were therefore not made in vain nor forgotten. The battling bastards improved American morale and spurred American fighting spirit. Thank you. That's it, everybody. Thank you. Okay.